The last thing I expected when I walked into that boardroom was to see Dr. Carmen Rodriguez, sitting across from the investors, but when my mother's face went white as she realized who was about to become my business partner, I knew this moment was worth every sleepless night I'd spent building my company. My name is Zoe Hartwell, and the woman who spent years telling me that therapy was for weak people was about to watch me sign $1 million deal with the therapist who saved my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain was coming down hard against the windows of the Burnside Professional Building, each drop hitting the glass like tiny accusations I wasn't ready to face. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel of my Honda Civic until my knuckles turned white, staring up at the fourth floor where Dr. Carmen Rodriguez had her practice. My mother's voice echoed in my head like a broken record that refused to stop playing. Therapy is for weak people, Zoe. Strong people handle their problems privately. We don't air our dirty laundry to strangers who get paid to pretend they care. Victoria Hartwell had been saying variations of this speech for as long as I could remember. Growing up in the pristine West Hills neighborhood of Portland, where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every family portrait looked like it belonged in a catalog, mental health was treated like a contagious disease that might spread if you acknowledged it existed. When my best friend in high school started seeing a counselor after her parents' divorce, my mother pulled me aside and warned me not to get too close. That kind of instability is catching, she'd said, adjusting her pearl necklace with the same precision she used to arrange the flowers in our living room. But sitting there in that parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in March, with my anxiety clawing at my chest like a wild animal trying to escape a cage, I finally understood what my college roommate meant when she said that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. I'd been having panic attacks for months, waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing and my sheets soaked in sweat, convinced that something terrible was about to happen even though I couldn't name what it was. The attacks had started getting worse after I graduated from Portland State University and moved back home while job hunting. Living under my mother's constant scrutiny felt like being under a microscope where every breath was analyzed and every emotion was judged. I finally forced myself out of the car and into the elevator, my reflection staring back at me in the polished steel door. I looked exactly like what I was, a 24-year-old woman who was barely holding it together, wearing a blazer that belonged to my more confident sister Natalie, and shoes that pinched my feet because I'd grabbed them in a panic that morning. When the elevator dinged and the doors opened to reveal a hallway lined with tasteful artwork and soft lighting, I almost turned around and went home. Dr. Rodriguez's waiting room was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the sterile clinical environment I'd imagined, it felt warm and inviting, with comfortable chairs arranged around a coffee table that held actual books instead of just magazines about home improvement and healthy living. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, looked up from her computer and smiled. "You must be Zoe. Dr. Rodriguez is ready for you." The first thing I noticed about Dr. Carmen Rodriguez was that she didn't look like someone who would judge me for being there. She was probably in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and wearing a cardigan that looked like something my favorite college professor might have chosen. Her office was filled with plants and natural light, and she had a way of sitting that made it seem like she had all the time in the world to listen to whatever I needed to say. "What brings you here today?" she asked, and something about the genuine curiosity in her voice made my throat tighten with tears I'd been holding back for weeks. I told her about the panic attacks, about feeling like I was drowning in expectations I could never meet, about how my mother's constant criticism had become a voice in my head that never shut up. I talked about how my sister Natalie seemed to glide through life effortlessly, collecting achievements like souvenirs, while I struggled to figure out what I even wanted to do with my future. I explained how my father Robert had checked out emotionally years ago, leaving my mother to run the family like a corporation, where love was performance-based and mistakes were unforgivable. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question, but mostly just creating space for me to finally say all the things I'd been carrying around like stones in my pocket. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a moment before saying, "It sounds like you've been carrying a lot of responsibility for other people's emotions. That's exhausting work. I left that first session feeling lighter than I had in months, but also terrified about what my mother would say if she found out. I'd paid in cash and parked 3 blocks away, as if I were conducting some kind of covert operation instead of taking care of my mental health. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was more afraid of my mother discovering my therapy appointments than I had been of actually making the appointment in the first place. For the next few weeks, I developed an elaborate system of lies to cover my Tuesday afternoon absence. I told my mother I was networking at coffee shops, applying for jobs at the library, or meeting with former classmates about potential opportunities. Each lie felt like a small betrayal of the progress I was making with Dr. Rodriguez, but I wasn't ready for the confrontation that honesty would bring. My mother had opinions about everything, from the way I dressed, to the friends I chose, to the career path I was considering, and I knew that therapy would be seen as the ultimate sign of failure in her carefully constructed world. During our third session, Dr. Rodriguez asked me about my interests and what kind of work felt meaningful to me. I found myself talking about technology and how fascinated I was by the potential for apps and platforms to connect people and solve real problems. I'd always been good with computers, but my mother had steered me toward more practical majors like business and communications. Technology changes too fast, she'd said. You need something stable, something respectable. But as I talked to Dr. Rodriguez about the apps I used and the problems I saw in the world that technology might be able to address, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. She encouraged me to explore these interests, to maybe take some online courses or attend local meetups for people in the tech industry. For the first time in my life, I had someone who wasn't trying to reshape my dreams to fit their vision of who I should be. The breakthrough came during our 6th session when Dr. Rodriguez asked me to describe what my ideal day would look like if I could design my life exactly the way I wanted it. I talked about working on projects that mattered, about having the freedom to be creative and solve problems, about building something that could help other people feel less alone. As I spoke, I realized that many of my ideas centered around mental health and wellness, probably because therapy had been such a transformative experience for me. Have you ever thought about combining your interest in technology with your passion for mental health? Dr. Rodriguez asked. The question hit me like lightning. I'd been thinking about these two areas as separate parts of my life, but she was right. There was incredible potential in bringing them together. That night, I went home and started researching mental health apps and platforms. I discovered a whole world of entrepreneurs and developers who were working to make therapy more accessible, to create tools that could help people track their moods and manage their anxiety, to build communities where people could find support and resources. The more I read, the more excited I became about the possibilities. I started sketching out ideas for an app that could connect people with licensed therapists, but also provide resources for self-care, mindfulness exercises, and peer support groups. I imagined a platform that could make mental health care more affordable and accessible, especially for people who lived in areas where therapy wasn't readily available or who couldn't afford traditional counseling services. When I brought my initial concepts to Dr. Rodriguez the following week, her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "This is brilliant, Zoe. You're identifying a real need and thinking about innovative ways to address it." She paused, then added, "You know, I've been thinking about ways to expand my practice and reach more people. Have you considered what it would take to actually develop something like this?" That conversation planted a seed that would grow into something I never could have imagined. Dr. Rodriguez began sharing articles with me about mental health technology, introducing me to other professionals in the field, and encouraging me to attend workshops and conferences where I could learn more about app development and entrepreneurship. She never pushed, but she consistently supported my growing interest in this intersection of technology and wellness. Meanwhile, at home, I was becoming increasingly skilled at hiding my weekly therapy appointments and my growing passion for this new direction in my life. My mother had noticed that I seemed more energetic lately, but she attributed it to what she assumed was my intensive job search. "I'm glad you're finally taking your future seriously," she said one evening over dinner. "Your father has some connections in real estate development if you're interested in something stable." I smiled and nodded, but inside I was building towards something she couldn't have imagined. I was taking online courses in basic coding and user experience design, attending virtual meetups for women in tech, and slowly developing a business plan for my mental health platform idea. Rodriguez had connected me with a mentor, Patricia Wong, who ran a successful startup focused on healthcare technology. Patricia was everything my mother thought a successful woman should be: confident, articulate, and financially independent, but she'd achieved it by following her passion rather than other people's expectations. During one of our mentoring sessions at a coffee shop in the Pearl District, Patricia asked me about my family's reaction to my entrepreneurial plans. When I admitted that I hadn't told them yet, she raised an eyebrow. "You're building something incredible here, Zoe. At some point, you're going to have to stop hiding your light under a bushel." She was right, but I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I was still figuring out how to be the person I was becoming while living in the shadow of the person my mother expected me to be. Therapy had given me tools for managing my anxiety and understanding my own worth, but it hadn't yet given me the courage to fully step into my power. The catalyst came during a family dinner in late June, when my sister Natalie announced that she'd gotten a promotion at her marketing firm. My parents were thrilled, asking detailed questions about her new responsibilities and salary increase. When the conversation turned to me, my mother's tone shifted from pride to barely concealed frustration. "Zoe's still exploring her options," she said, the words dripping with disapproval. "Though I wish she'd explore them a bit more urgently. It's been 4 months since graduation." My father looked up from his plate for the first time during the meal. "Maybe it's time to consider grad school, if you can't find anything suitable. Another degree might make you more competitive." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that usually preceded a panic attack, but this time something different happened. Instead of the overwhelming fear I was used to, I felt a surge of clarity. I looked at my parents and sister sitting around the polished dining room table, and I realized that their version of success, the steady job, the predictable path, the life lived according to other people's rules, wasn't what I wanted anymore. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I've been working on something, a business plan for a mental health platform." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, and Natalie's eyes widened with surprise. "Mental health," my mother repeated, as if I'd announced I was planning to become a professional circus performer. "What do you know about mental health?" "More than you might think," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "I've been doing a lot of research, taking courses, talking to people in the industry." "What kind of people?" The suspicion in her voice was unmistakable. This was the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. "I've been seeing a therapist, Mom, Dr. Carmen Rodriguez. She's been helping me work through some things, and she's also been incredibly supportive of my business ideas." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother set down her fork with deliberate precision, the way she did when she was about to deliver a lecture that would leave no room for argument. "Zoe Hartwell," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury, "please tell me you haven't been paying some stranger to listen to you complain about your family." "It's not about complaining," I said, my heart pounding but my voice still steady. "It's about understanding myself better and learning to manage my anxiety." "Anxiety?" My father looked genuinely confused. "What anxiety? You seem fine to me." My mother leaned forward, her eyes narrow. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You've let some therapist convince you that you have problems that don't exist. These people create dependency, Zoe. They make money by making you think you need them." "That's not true," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. Rodriguez has helped me more in 3 months than your family has in 24 years. My mother interrupted. "Is that what you were going to say?" Natalie shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly wishing she could disappear. My father had returned to his meal, apparently deciding that this confrontation was between my mother and me. "I wasn't going to say that," I replied, though we both knew it was exactly what I'd been thinking. "I'm just saying that therapy has been helpful, and it's given me clarity about what I want to do with my life." "What you want to do," my mother repeated, is build a business around the idea that people can't handle their own problems. Do you understand how that reflects on this family? Do you understand what people will think when they find out that Victoria Hartwell's daughter is essentially advertising that our family produces people who need professional help to function? Her words hit me like a physical blow, but something inside me had shifted during those months of therapy. I'd learned to recognize the difference between my mother's voice and my own inner voice, and for the first time in my life I trusted my own voice more. I understand that you're embarrassed, I said quietly, but I'm not going to stop seeing Dr. Rodriguez, and I'm not going to stop working on my business plan. My mother's face flushed red. As long as you're living under this roof and we're supporting you, you absolutely will stop this nonsense. I won't have people thinking that we raised a daughter who can't handle her own problems. Then maybe, I said, standing up from the table, I shouldn't be living under this roof anymore. I left the dining room before anyone could respond, my hands shaking but my head clear. I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom and started packing a bag, knowing that I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Within an hour I was driving through the Portland evening toward my friend Kai Thompson's apartment, where I knew I could stay until I figured out my next move. Kai had been my study partner in college, and one of the few people who'd never made me feel like I was too sensitive or too intense. When I showed up at their door with a suitcase and tears in my eyes, they didn't ask questions. They just made tea and let me talk until I'd processed what had just happened. Your mom's terrified, Kai said after I'd told them about the dinner conversation. People like that, who've built their whole identity around appearing perfect, they see therapy as a threat to their entire worldview. I know, I said, curled up on their couch with a mug of chamomile tea, but I can't go back to pretending that I'm okay when I'm not, or that I want what she wants me to want. So what's your plan? I looked out the window at the city lights twinkling below. I guess I keep building what I'm building and see where it leads. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into developing my mental health platform with an intensity that surprised even me. I was staying in Kai's spare room and working part-time at a coffee shop to cover my basic expenses, but every free moment was dedicated to research, coding tutorials, and refining my business plan. Dr. Rodriguez had reduced my session fee to accommodate my new financial situation, and our conversations increasingly focused on the practical aspects of turning my idea into reality. I've been thinking about your platform, she said during one of our sessions in late July. There's a gap in the market for something that combines professional therapy with peer support and self-care tools, but it would need to be developed by someone who really understands both the technology side and the mental health side. That's exactly what I've been thinking. I know I still have a lot to learn about the tech development, but I feel like my experience as a client gives me insights that a lot of app developers might not have. Dr. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. You know, I've been considering ways to expand my own. I love individual therapy, but there are so many people who need support and can't access it through traditional channels. Something in her tone made me look up from my notebook. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, she said with a smile, that maybe we should explore the possibility of working together on this. The idea was so unexpected and so perfect that I almost didn't trust it. You mean like a partnership? I mean exactly like a partnership. You bring the technological vision and the user experience perspective. I bring the clinical expertise and the professional network. We build something that could actually make a difference. That conversation changed everything. Suddenly, my abstract business plan had a potential co-founder who brought credibility and expertise I couldn't have gained on my own. Dr. Rodriguez introduced me to other mental health professionals who were interested in innovative approaches to care, and I started connecting with developers and entrepreneurs who were working on similar projects in other industries. We spent the next several weeks meeting regularly outside of our therapy sessions to discuss the practical aspects of a potential partnership. Rodriguez was surprisingly savvy about business development, and she had insights about regulatory requirements and ethical considerations that I never would have thought of on my own. We decided to call our platform MindBridge, reflecting our goal of bridging the gap between professional mental health care and accessible self-care tools. By September, we had a prototype and a comprehensive business plan. We'd also attracted the attention of several investors who were interested in funding mental health technology startup. Patricia Wong, my mentor, had connected us with a venture capital firm that specialized in healthcare innovation, and they'd invited us to present our concept to their investment committee. I was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. This was the opportunity I'd been working toward, but it also meant that my new life and my old life were about to collide in a very public way. The investment firm's offices were in downtown Portland, just a few miles from the West Hills neighborhood where I'd grown up. There was a real possibility that someone from my family's social circle would hear about the presentation, and I knew that my mother would find out about my mental health business sooner or later. Rodriguez and I spent hours preparing for the presentation, refining our pitch and anticipating potential questions from the investor. We practiced in her office after hours, with me handling the technology and market analysis sections, while she focused on the clinical and ethical aspects of our platform. We worked well together, and I was constantly amazed by how much she believed in both the project and my ability to help lead it. The night before our presentation, I called Natalie for the first time since I'd moved out of our parents' house. I wasn't sure what kind of reception I'd get, but I needed to hear a familiar voice before taking this huge step. "Zoe?" She sounded surprised to hear from me. "Are you okay? Mom's been worried sick, has she?" I couldn't keep the skepticism out of my voice. "Well, she's been angry mostly, but I think that's how she shows worry. She keeps asking if I've heard from you." I took a deep breath. "Nat, I'm calling because I want you to know that I'm doing something tomorrow that's really important to me. I'm presenting a business plan to investors, and there's a chance it might get some attention." "That's amazing." Her enthusiasm sounded genuine. "What kind of business?" "A mental health platform, an app that connects people with therapists and provides tools for managing anxiety and depression." The silence stretched between us. Finally she said, "Mom's going to lose her mind. I know, but I can't keep living my life based on what will or won't upset her." "I get that," Natalie said quietly, "and for what it's worth, I think it sounds like something that could really help people. I've actually been thinking about therapy myself lately. This job promotion has been more stressful than I expected." The admission surprised me. Natalie had always seemed so confident and put together, but I was learning that appearances could be deceiving even within families. "You should do it," I said. "It's been one of the best decisions I've ever made." We talked for another few minutes about logistics and family dynamics, and she promised to try to run interference with our parents if my business got media attention. It wasn't the same as having their support, but it felt good to know that I had at least one ally in the family. The morning of the presentation, I woke up in Kai's spare room with my stomach in knots. I'd barely slept, alternating between excitement about the opportunity and terror about everything that could go wrong. Rodriguez had suggested we meet for coffee before heading to the investor meeting, and when I saw her sitting at a corner table in Stumptown Coffee, calm and professional in a navy blazer, I felt some of my anxiety ease. "How are you feeling?" she asked as I sat down with my lot. "Like I might throw up, but also like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." She smiled. "That sounds about right for a big moment like this." We reviewed our presentation one more time, dividing up the sections and making sure we were both comfortable with the technology demonstrations I'd prepared. Rodriguez had brought printouts of testimonials from current clients who'd given permission for their feedback to be included in our pitch, and reading their words about how therapy had changed their lives reminded me why this project mattered so much. "Whatever happens today," Rodriguez said as we gathered our materials, "I want you to know that working with you on this has been one of the most energizing professional experiences I've had in years. You've reminded me why I became a therapist in the first place." Her words meant more to me than she could have known. For so many years, I'd felt like I was disappointing the important people in my life. Having someone I respected so much express confidence in my abilities was like being given permission to believe in myself. The investment firm's offices were on the 20th floor of a glass tower downtown, with views of the Willamette River and Mount Hood in the distance. As we waited in the reception area, I tried to focus on my breathing and review the key points of our presentation. Rodriguez seemed completely at ease, chatting with the receptionist about the weather and the traffic downtown. When we were called into the conference room, I was surprised to see how many people were seated around the polished wooden table. Patricia Wong was there, along with several people I didn't recognize, and a few faces I'd seen in local business publications. The lead investor, a woman named Catherine Mills, welcomed us and explained that they'd invited a few additional partners to join the meeting because of their interest in mental health technology. Rodriguez and I had decided that I would start with an overview of the market opportunity and user experience, then she would discuss the clinical framework and ethical considerations, and we'd finish together with our financial projections and growth strategy. As I connected my laptop to the conference room's display system, I felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in my chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else: anticipation. I began by sharing statistics about mental health care accessibility and the growing demand for digital wellness tools. I talked about my own experience as a therapy client and how that had informed my understanding of what users would want from a platform like MindBridge. I demonstrated the prototype we'd developed, showing how users could connect with licensed therapists, access guided meditation and journaling tools, and participate in moderated peer support groups. The investors asked thoughtful questions about user acquisition, data privacy, and scalability. I felt confident answering most of them, and when I wasn't sure about something, Dr. Rodriguez seamlessly stepped in with her expertise. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We were functioning as a real team, building on each other's strengths and covering each other's gaps. Dr. Rodriguez's portion of the presentation was brilliant. She explained the evidence-based approaches that would inform our platform's design, addressed concerns about maintaining therapeutic relationships in a digital environment, and outlined the quality assurance protocols we'd implement to ensure user safety. Her credibility as a licensed psychologist clearly impressed the investors, and I could see them taking detailed notes as she spoke. We were just transitioning into our financial projections when the conference room door opened, and a late arrival slipped in. I glanced up briefly to acknowledge the newcomer, then looked again in shock. It was my mother. Victoria Hartwell stood in the doorway wearing her signature pearls and a look of complete bewilderment. She scanned the room until her eyes landed on me, then on Dr. Rodriguez, and I watched as recognition dawned on her face. She'd clearly expected to find me in some kind of trouble, not presenting a business plan to a room full of investors alongside the therapist she'd forbidden me to see. Catherine Mills looked up from her notes. "Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for joining us. Please, have a seat." My mind was reeling. How did my mother know Catherine Mills? How did she know about this meeting? And why was she being welcomed as if she belonged here? My mother took a seat at the far end of the table, her eyes never leaving my face. I could see her struggling to process what she was witnessing, her daughter, the one she'd dismissed as weak and unstable, presenting what was clearly a professional business proposal to a group of serious investors. Dr. Rodriguez had noticed the disruption but continued seamlessly with our presentation, explaining our revenue model and discussing the potential for expansion into corporate wellness programs. I forced myself to focus on her words and the investors' questions, but I was acutely aware of my mother's presence at the edge of my vision. When we finished our formal presentation, Catherine Mills smiled and said, "This is exactly the kind of innovative approach we've been looking for in the mental health space. Dr. Rodriguez, your clinical expertise combined with Zoe's technological vision creates a compelling partnership." She turned to my mother. "Victoria, you mentioned that you knew one of our presenters. I had no idea Zoe was your daughter when we scheduled this meeting." My mother's voice was tight when she responded, "I wasn't aware that Zoe was involved in this type of venture." The awkwardness in the room was palpable. Patricia Wong jumped in to ask about our timeline for beta testing, giving everyone a chance to move past the family tension that had suddenly materialized in the middle of our business meeting. For the next 20 minutes we answered questions about implementation, discussed potential partnerships with healthcare systems, and outlined our plans for user testing and regulatory compliance. Throughout it all, I could feel my mother watching every word I spoke, every gesture I made, as if she was seeing me for the first time. When the meeting concluded, several investors expressed serious interest in moving forward with funding discussion. Catherine Mills asked us to prepare additional materials for a follow-up meeting the next week, and Patricia Wong suggested we connect with her legal team to discuss partnership structures and intellectual property consideration. As people began filing out of the conference room, my mother approached Dr. Rodriguez and me. I braced myself for confrontation, but her first words surprised me. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that had finally burned itself out. My mother, Victoria Hartwell, the woman who had spent years telling me that seeking help was a sign of weakness, was standing in a conference room, full of investors apologizing to the therapist she had forbidden me to see. Rodriguez maintained her professional composure, but I caught the slight raise of her eyebrows. "Mrs. Hartwell, that's not necessary. Zoe has been working incredibly hard on this project." "No, it is necessary." My mother's voice was stronger now, though I could see her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her designer handbag. "I had no idea what you were building here." When Catherine called and mentioned that someone named Zoe Hartwell was presenting a mental health startup, I assumed it was some kind of mistake or perhaps a different person entirely. Catherine Mills, who had been gathering her papers, looked up with interest. "Victoria and I serve on the board of the Portland Women's Business Alliance together." When she heard the name Hartwell, she was curious enough to attend. I felt like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. The woman who had made me feel ashamed for seeking therapy was now standing in front of the very therapist she had criticized, surrounded by evidence that her weak daughter had built something impressive enough to attract serious investment interest. "I think," Rodriguez said gently, "perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." My mother nodded, though she seemed reluctant to leave the conference room where she had just witnessed a complete reversal of everything she thought she knew about my capability. "Could we perhaps meet for coffee? I have many questions." I found my voice finally. "Mom, what are you doing here? How do you even know Catherine?" "I've been on the Women's Business Board for 3 years," she said, looking directly at me for the first time since entering the room. "We meet monthly to review funding applications for female entrepreneurs." When Catherine mentioned a promising mental health platform developed by a young woman named Hartwell, I thought perhaps it was some distant relative or someone using our name professionally. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My mother, who had dismissed my ambitions and forbidden my therapy, was part of an organization dedicated to supporting exactly the kind of venture I had created. She had inadvertently been in a position to influence funding for the very project she would have tried to stop if she had known I was involved. Patricia Wong, who had been listening to this exchange with fascination, stepped forward. "Zoe, why don't we plan to reconvene early next week? This gives you time to prepare the additional materials Catherine requested. And it sounds like you have some family conversations to navigate." Dr. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "That sounds wise. Zoe, why don't you take some time to process what just happened here? We can discuss the business implications during our session tomorrow." I was grateful for their diplomatic intervention. The last hour had been the most professionally successful of my life, immediately followed by one of the most emotionally complex family encounters I had ever experienced. I needed space to think before I said something I might regret. My mother waited while I packed up my laptop and presentation materials, then followed Dr. Rodriguez and me to the elevator. The ride down 20 floors was conducted in complete silence, with all 3 of us staring at the changing numbers as if they held the secrets of the universe. When we reached the lobby, Dr. Rodriguez turned to my mother. "Miss Hartwell, there's a quiet cafe across the street if you'd like to talk. I have an hour before my next appointment." "I would appreciate that very much," my mother replied. I hesitated, unsure whether I wanted to be part of this conversation. The last time my mother and I had discussed my therapy, I had ended up moving out of the family home, but curiosity won over caution, and I found myself following them across the busy downtown street to a small coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. We chose a corner table away from the afternoon crowd of business people and students. My mother ordered black coffee, Dr. Rodriguez requested green tea, and I asked for a chai latte, needing something sweet and comforting to counteract the adrenaline that was still coursing through my system. I owe both of you an explanation, my mother began once we were settled. And perhaps more than that, I wrapped my hands around my warm mug and waited. This was uncharted territory for our family. My mother was not someone who typically admitted to being wrong about anything, let alone something as fundamental as her views on mental health. When Zoe moved out this summer, I was furious, she continued. Not just because she had defied my wishes about therapy, but because I felt like she was rejecting everything our family represented. I've spent my entire adult life building a reputation in this community, and I was terrified that having a daughter in therapy would somehow reflect poorly on our family's stability. Dr. Rodriguez listened without judgment, occasionally nodding to encourage my mother to continue. But watching that presentation today, my mother's voice grew quieter. Seeing the investors' reactions, understanding the scope of what you've built, I realized that my fear was making me blind to who my daughter actually is. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. Years of criticism and dismissal couldn't be erased by one conversation, no matter how unexpected or seemingly sincere. Mom, I said carefully, I appreciate you saying that, but you have to understand that your reaction to my therapy wasn't just about family reputation. You made me feel like there was something fundamentally wrong with me for needing help. My mother's face crumpled slightly. I know, and I was wrong. Sitting in that conference room, listening to you speak so confidently about market analysis and user experience, watching you partner with Dr. Rodriguez on something so sophisticated and meaningful, I realized that therapy didn't make you weak. It made you strong enough to pursue something I never would have imagined you capable of. Dr. Rodriguez spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. Mrs. Hartwell, can I ask what shaped your views about mental health care? My mother was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup as if it might provide her with the right words. My mother struggled with depression when I was growing up. This was in the 1970s. When mental health treatment was much more limited and heavily stigmatized. She was hospitalized twice, and the entire experience was traumatic for our family. My father's attitude was that we didn't discuss it, we didn't acknowledge it, and we certainly didn't seek help that might become part of a public record. This was information I had never heard before. My grandmother had died when I was 10, and I remembered her as a quiet, gentle woman who always seemed a little sad. I had never known about any mental health struggle. I grew up believing that seeking professional help was something you did only when you had completely lost control, when you were so ill that you couldn't function in society. My mother continued. The idea that therapy could be a tool for growth and self-discovery, rather than a last resort for crisis management, was completely foreign to me. Dr. Rodriguez nodded understanding. That was a common perspective during that era. Mental health care was primarily focused on crisis intervention rather than preventive care or personal development. When Zoe started having what she called panic attacks, my mother looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I genuinely believed that acknowledging them would make them worse. I thought that if we ignored them and focused on practical solutions like career planning and goal setting, they would resolve themselves. But they didn't, I said quietly. They got worse until I could barely leave the house some days. I didn't know that. My mother whispered, you never told me how severe they were, because you made it clear that you didn't want to hear about them. Every time I tried to explain what I was experiencing, you changed the subject or suggested that I just needed to exercise more or get more sleep. The weight of our family's communication failures hung heavy in the air between us. Dr. Rodriguez sat quietly, allowing us to process this conversation at our own pace. I watched you present today, my mother said eventually, and I saw a confidence and clarity that I haven't seen in you since you were a child. If therapy gave you that, then I was not just wrong about its value, I was wrong about what strength actually looks like. I felt something shift inside my chest, a loosening of tension I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. Dr. Rodriguez, my mother turned to address her directly, I owe you a particular apology. I said things about therapists and therapy that were not just incorrect, but hurtful to someone who has clearly had a profound positive impact on my daughter's life. I appreciate that, Mrs. Hartwell, But I think the more important conversation is between you and Zoe about how to move forward. My mother looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was humble, uncertain, and completely unlike the confident authority she usually projected. I don't know how to fix what I've broken between us, she said. I don't know how to support something I've spent months criticizing, but I want to learn. I want to understand what you've built and why it matters. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into water I couldn't see the bottom of. It matters because there are millions of people like me who have been told that seeking help is a sign of weakness. There are young people having panic attacks in their bedrooms, convinced that something is fundamentally wrong with them because they can't just think their way out of anxiety or depression. Our platform could connect them with qualified professionals and give them tools to understand that mental health care is just healthcare. As I spoke, I could see my mother really listening, perhaps for the first time in years. Her usual expression of polite attention had been replaced by genuine engagement. The technology component is crucial, I continued, because it removes barriers that prevent people from accessing care. Geographic limitations, scheduling conflicts, financial constraints, stigma about walking into a therapist's office. If we can create a platform that feels safe and accessible, we can reach people who might never seek help otherwise. Dr. Rodriguez added, what Zoe has designed addresses real gaps in mental health care delivery. Her user experience perspective, combined with clinical best practices, could genuinely revolutionize how people access and engage with mental health services. My mother nodded slowly. And the investors today, they believe this could be financially successful as well as socially beneficial. Very much so, I replied. The market for mental health technology is growing rapidly, but most existing platforms focus either on peer support or clinical services, not both. Our integrated approach differentiates us significantly. What would you need to move forward? The question surprised me. It was practical, forward-looking, and completely different from the skeptical interrogation I had expected. Funding for initial development and beta test, a team of developers and designers, partnerships with mental health professionals who want to participate in the platform, regulatory guidance to ensure we're meeting all compliance requirements. And you believe you can manage all of that? I looked at Dr. Rodriguez, who nodded encouragingly. We believe we can manage it together. My technology and business development skills, combined with her clinical expertise and professional network. My mother was quiet for several minutes, processing everything we had discussed. Finally she spoke. I have connections in the Portland business community that might be helpful, not just through the Women's Business Alliance, but through your father's work and my own professional network. I don't know enough about technology or mental health to offer expertise, but I do know how to open doors and make introductions. I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. You want to help us? I want to help you, she corrected gently. I want to support my daughter in something she's passionate about and talented at. I want to make amends for the months when I failed to see what you were really capable of. Dr. Rodriguez glanced at her watch. I'm afraid I need to head back for my next appointment, but this has been a remarkable conversation. Zoe, why don't we plan to discuss the business implications of today's events during our session tomorrow? And Miss Hartwell, if you're genuinely interested in learning more about what we're building, perhaps you could join us for coffee again next week. My mother nodded eagerly. I would like that very much. As we walked back toward the office building where Dr. Rodriguez's practice was located, I found myself in the surreal position of making small talk with my mother about my business venture and my therapy appointments. 6 hours earlier, these had been the two topics most likely to start a family argument. Now they were the foundation for what felt like the beginning of a completely different relationship. Zoe, my mother said, as we reached the building entrance, I know I have a lot of work to do to earn back your trust, but I want you to know that watching you present today was one of the proudest moments I've had as a parent. Not because of the business success, but because I could see that you found your voice. I hugged her then tentatively at first, then more firmly as she hugged me back. It wasn't a magical healing of all our family wounds, but it was a beginning. After my mother left, I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to process what had just happened. The day had started with terror about presenting to investors and had ended with my mother apologizing for her stance on therapy and offering to help support my business. It felt like I had stepped through a doorway into an alternate universe where the fundamental rules of my family had suddenly changed. I drove back to Kai's apartment in a daze, replaying conversations and trying to understand what this meant for my relationship with my parents and for the future of Mindridge. When I walked through the door, Kai took one look at my face and immediately started making tea. "So," they said, settling onto the couch beside me, "how did it go?" I told them about the presentation, the investors' positive response, and my mother's unexpected appearance and subsequent apology. Kai listened with increasing amazement, occasionally interrupting with questions or expressions of disbelief. "Your mom, the same woman who told you therapy was for weak people, offered to help you build a mental health business. I know. I keep waiting to wake up from whatever weird dream this is. Do you trust her?" It was the question I had been avoiding asking myself. "I don't know. I want to, but years of criticism and dismissal don't just disappear because of one conversation." "What does your gut tell you?" I considered this. My gut tells me that she was genuinely shocked by what she saw today. I think she realized that her assumptions about me and about therapy were wrong, and she's trying to figure out how to handle that. That's not the same as trusting her with your business or your emotional well-being. No, it's not, but maybe it's a start. Kai nodded thoughtfully. "What did Dr. Rodriguez think about all this?" "She was incredibly professional. She didn't take my mother's apology personally, but she also didn't dismiss the impact of what happened. I think she sees it as an opportunity for family healing, but she's not pushing me to trust too quickly." "Smart woman, she really is. Working with her on this business has been amazing. She brings such credibility and expertise, but she also trusts my vision and my abilities in a way that's completely new for me." That night, I lay awake thinking about the trajectory of the past 6 months. In January, I had been living in my childhood bedroom, having panic attacks, and feeling like a disappointment to my family. Now I was developing a business with my therapist, living independently, and apparently impressing investors with my professional presentation skills. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built through weekly therapy sessions, countless hours of research and development, difficult conversations with family members, and the gradual recognition that I had value and capabilities that extended far beyond what my mother had ever acknowledged. But the day's events had also highlighted how much work remained to be done. Building a business was complex and demanding. Rebuilding a relationship with my mother would require patience and careful boundary, and managing the intersection of my personal therapy relationship with my professional partnership with Dr. Rodriguez would require ongoing attention and clear communication. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to my favorite coffee shop in the Pearl District to prepare for my therapy session. I wanted to process the previous day's events before discussing the business implications with Dr. Rodriguez. I made a list of my concerns. How would my mother's involvement change the family dynamics around my business? Could I trust her support to be genuine and sustained? Or was this a temporary reaction to being impressed by the investor's response? How would working closely with Dr. Rodriguez on business matters affect our therapeutic relationship? What boundaries would we need to establish to maintain both the professional partnership and the clinical work? When I arrived at Dr. Rodriguez's office, she greeted me with a warm smile and what looked like genuine excitement about discussing the previous day's developments. "How are you feeling about everything that happened yesterday?" she asked once we were settled in her office. "Overwhelmed, excited, confused, and hopeful," I replied, sometimes all at the same time. That sounds like a reasonable response to such a significant day. Let's start with the business side and then talk about the family dynamics. We spent the first half of our session discussing the investors' feedback and planning our next steps. Catherine Mills had requested additional financial projections, and we needed to prepare more detailed information about our technology development timeline and staffing plans. Rodriguez had already started reaching out to other mental health professionals who might be interested in joining our platform, and she had received enthusiastic responses from several colleagues. "I think we have a real opportunity here," she said. "The investor interest feels genuine, and the feedback was substantive rather than just polite. But we need to be realistic about the timeline and the challenges ahead. What are you most concerned about? Managing the relationship between our clinical work and our business partnership. I've been thinking about this a lot since yesterday, and I think we need to establish some clear boundaries. I felt a flutter of anxiety. Are you having second thoughts about the partnership? Not at all, but I think we need to be intentional about maintaining our therapeutic relationship alongside our business relationship. They serve different purposes and require different boundaries. She was right, of course. Dr. Rodriguez had been my therapist for 8 months, and that relationship had been foundational to my personal growth and recovery. Adding a business partnership to that dynamic could complicate things in ways that might undermine both relationships. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we should consider bringing in a business consultant or advisor who can help us navigate the partnership structure and make sure we're protecting both the clinical work and the business development. Someone who understands both mental health ethics and startup dynamic. It was a practical suggestion that hadn't occurred to me, but it made immediate sense. We needed expertise in areas where neither of us had extensive experience, and we needed someone who could help us maintain appropriate boundaries between our different professional relationships. I also think, Dr. Rodriguez continued, that we should discuss how your mother's potential involvement fits into our business planning. Yesterday's conversation was remarkable, but integrating family members into business ventures can be complicated. This was the conversation I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. My mother's offer to help had felt genuine, but I wasn't sure how to evaluate her motivations or her ability to support something she had so recently opposed. I'm torn, I admit. Part of me wants to believe that she's genuinely changed her perspective and wants to support me. But part of me is worried that this is just another way for her to control or influence what I'm doing. Those are both reasonable concerns. What would help you feel more confident about her intentions? I thought about this for several minutes. I think I need to see consistency over time. One conversation doesn't undo years of criticism, and I need to understand exactly what kind of help she's offering and what she would expect in return. That sounds wise. What if we invited her to join us for coffee again next week, but with a specific agenda focused on business rather than family dynamic? We could ask her to explain exactly what connections and resources she might be able to provide, and we could be clear about what kind of involvement would be helpful versus what might be problematic. The suggestion felt manageable. It would give my mother an opportunity to demonstrate her commitment while allowing me to maintain control over the boundaries of her involvement. I like that idea. It feels like a way to explore the possibility without committing to anything I'm not ready for. We spent the rest of our session discussing my emotional responses to the previous day's events. The investor presentation had been validating in ways I hadn't expected. Being taken seriously by successful business people had shifted something fundamental in how I saw myself and my capability. You seemed different in that conference room, Dr. Rodriguez observed. More confident, more authoritative. How did that feel? Like I was finally inhabiting my own skin, I replied. Like all the work we've done in therapy had prepared me for exactly that moment. I think it had. The young woman who walked into my office 8 months ago wouldn't have been ready for what you accomplished yesterday. As I left Dr. Rodriguez's office, I felt more grounded than I had since the previous day's whirlwind. We had a plan for moving forward with the business, a strategy for managing the complexities of our dual relationship, and a framework for evaluating my mother's potential involvement. But I also felt the weight of how much my life had changed and how much more change lay ahead. If the investors decided to fund MindBridge, my days would be consumed with product development, team building, and business growth. If my mother followed through on her offer to help, I would be navigating family relationships in an entirely new context. And throughout it all, I would be learning how to be an entrepreneur while continuing to heal from years of family dysfunction. That evening, I called Natalie to update her on the previous day's event. She listened with fascination as I described the presentation and our mother's unexpected appearance and apology. I can't believe Mom was on the board that might fund your business, she said. The irony is incredible. I know. It feels like something out of a movie. How do you feel about her wanting to help now? Cautious but curious. I want to believe that she's sincere, but I also need to protect myself and the business from her need to control things. Natalie was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I think yesterday probably changed something fundamental for her. She's been talking about your presentation all day, calling people to tell them about her entrepreneur daughter. I've never heard her sound so proud of something you've done. The information was both gratifying and concerning. I was glad that my mother felt proud, but I was also wary of being seen as a trophy or an achievement, rather than a person. I'm meeting with her and Dr. Rodriguez again next week to talk about how she might be able to help with the business. We'll see what happens. I think that's smart. Take it slow, but don't let fear of her past behavior prevent you from accepting help if it's genuinely offered. After we hung up, I spent the evening researching business advisors who specialized in healthcare startups and mental health technology. If Dr. Rodriguez and I were going to navigate the complexities of building a company together while maintaining our therapeutic relationship, we would need expert guidance. I also started a journal to track my thoughts and feelings about the rapid changes in my life. Therapy had taught me the value of processing experiences in writing, and I suspected that the coming weeks would bring emotional challenges that I would need to work through carefully. As I wrote about the previous day's events, I realized that something profound had shifted in how I saw myself and my place in the world. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was moving towards something I had chosen rather than away from something I was trying to escape. The anxiety and panic attacks that had driven me to therapy in the first place hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined my daily experience. Instead of feeling like symptoms of weakness or failure, they had become part of the story of how I had found my purpose and built something meaningful. I was still writing when my phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. "Zoe, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I want you to know that I'm committed to supporting you and learning about what you're building. I've made appointments with 3 business contacts who might be helpful, but I won't approach them until you give me permission. I love you and I'm proud of you." I stared at the message for a long time before responding, "Thank you, Mom. Let's talk more next week." It wasn't a declaration of trust or forgiveness, but it was a recognition that something new was beginning between us. Whether it would develop into genuine reconciliation or remain a careful professional collaboration remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the possibility of having a relationship with my mother that was based on mutual respect rather than her disappointment and my resentment. The week that followed was a blur of activity. Dr. Rodriguez and I worked on the additional materials requested by the investors, refining our financial projections and developing more detailed timelines for product development. I spent hours researching technology platforms and user interface design, while she reached out to mental health professionals who might be interested in joining our network. We also interviewed 3 potential business advisors, eventually settling on a woman named Elena Vasquez, who had extensive experience with healthcare startups and understood the unique challenges of mental health technology. Elena brought a clarity and pragmatism to our planning process that complemented our clinical and technical expertise. During one of our planning sessions, Elena asked a question that stopped me cold. "What happens if this business becomes wildly successful? Are you prepared for your life to change dramatically?" I realized that I had been so focused on proving that the business could work that I hadn't really considered what success would look like or require. Building a successful company would mean long hours, constant travel, media attention, and pressure that I had never experienced. "I think," I said slowly, "that I'm more prepared for success than I was 6 months ago. But you're right that I need to think more carefully about what I'm signing up for." Dr. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "Success could change our therapeutic relationship as well. If you become a public figure in the mental health space, it might affect the privacy and boundaries that therapy requires." These were complications I hadn't anticipated, but they were also problems that arose from opportunity rather than failure. A year earlier, I would never have imagined needing to worry about how business success might complicate my life. As our second meeting with my mother approached, I found myself increasingly curious about how she would handle the specific realities of supporting a business she had once opposed. It was one thing to apologize and offer general help. It would be another to actually connect us with her professional network and advocate for something she was still learning to understand. The night before our meeting, I called Dr. Rodriguez to discuss our strategy. "I think we should let her do most of the talking," she suggested. "Ask her to explain specifically what connections she has and how she envisions helping. Then we can evaluate whether her ideas align with what we actually need. What if she tries to take over or redirect our vision? Then we politely but firmly redirect the conversation back to our goals. This is our business, Zoe. She can offer support, but she can't change the fundamental direction." The confidence in Dr. Rodriguez's voice reminded me that I wasn't navigating this alone. Whatever challenges arose with my mother's involvement, I had a partner who was committed to protecting both our business vision and my personal growth. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to 8 months earlier. I had gone from having panic attacks in my childhood bedroom to preparing for my second meeting with potential business supporters. I had gone from hiding my therapy appointments to partnering with my therapist on a venture that could help thousands of people access mental health care. The transformation hadn't been easy or linear, but it had been profound. And tomorrow's meeting with my mother would be another test of how much had really changed, both in me and in our family dynamic. The coffee shop my mother chose for our second meeting was different from the one where we'd had our first honest conversation. This place was in the trendy Hawthorne district, with exposed brick walls and the kind of artisanal pastries that cost $8 each. It was clearly meant to signal that she was taking our business seriously, treating this like the professional meeting she claimed to want it to be. I arrived 15 minutes early, needing time to settle my nerves and review the questions Dr. Rodriguez and I had prepared. My mother had texted me that morning with a detailed agenda, complete with bullet points about her business connections and potential introductions she could facilitate. The level of preparation was both encouraging and slightly overwhelming. Dr. Rodriguez arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio that contained our updated business plan and the materials we'd developed for the second investor meeting. She looked calm and professional, but I caught her checking her phone twice, which was unusual for her. "Nervous?" I asked as we found a table near the window. "Curious," she replied. "This is uncharted territory for me too. I've never had a therapy client's parent offer to help with a business venture." My mother swept into the coffee shop 10 minutes later, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than I'd made in my entire month of part-time work. She carried a thick folder and had the focused energy of someone who'd spent considerable time preparing for this conversation. "Thank you both for agreeing to meet," she said, settling into her chair with the efficiency of someone accustomed to running meetings. "I've spent the past week researching mental health technology companies and speaking with colleagues about the market landscape." She opened her folder and withdrew what appeared to be a comprehensive report. I wanted to understand the industry before presuming to offer assistance. Dr. Rodriguez and I exchanged glances. This level of preparation exceeded our expectations and suggested that my mother's interest was more serious than either of us had anticipated. "I've identified 6 potential connections that might be valuable for MindBridge," my mother continued, consulting her notes. 3 are potential investors, 2 are technology executives who could advise on product development, and 1 is a marketing strategist who specializes in healthcare companies. She handed us each a copy of her research, complete with contact information, background summaries, and notes about why each person might be interested in our platform. The thoroughness was impressive and slightly intimidating. "Mrs. Hartwell," Dr. Rodriguez said carefully, "this is remarkably comprehensive. Can I ask what motivated such extensive preparation?" My mother set down her coffee cup and looked directly at both of us. I realized that offering to help without understanding what I was offering to help with was meaningless. If I'm going to contribute to this venture, I need to bring real value, not just good intentions. I felt a familiar flutter of weariness. My mother's version of helping had historically involved taking control and reshaping projects according to her vision. But the research she'd compiled was undeniably valuable, and her contacts could open doors that Dr. Rodriguez and I couldn't access on our own. "What would you want in return?" I asked, deciding to address the question directly. "I want to see you succeed," she replied. I want to be part of supporting something you've built rather than criticizing choices I don't understand. It was a good answer, but I needed more specificity. What would your involvement look like practically? Are you thinking about joining the company officially, or would this be more informal support? I think that depends on what would be most helpful to you. I could serve as an unofficial advisor, making introductions and providing strategic guidance when requested. Or if you preferred more formal involvement, I could consider joining an advisory board or providing direct investment. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. What are your thoughts about the mental health aspect of our platform? I want to make sure that any partnership we enter into is built on shared values about the importance of accessible mental health care. My mother was quiet for a moment, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. I'm still learning about mental health treatment from a clinical perspective, but what I understand now is that therapy isn't a sign of weakness or failure. It's a tool for growth and problem solving, like physical therapy or financial planning. She looked at me. Watching Zoe develop this business has taught me that my assumptions about therapy were not just wrong but harmful. I want to support something that could prevent other families from making the same mistakes I made. The acknowledgement felt significant, though I remained cautious about trusting it completely. My mother had a talent for saying what people wanted to hear when it served her purposes. Can we talk about the specific contact you've identified? Dr. Rodriguez asked, redirecting our focus to practical matters. My mother walked us through each potential connection, explaining their background, their investment focus, and why she thought they might be interested in MindBridge. Two of the investors specialized in healthcare technology. One had funded several successful mental health startups, and the technology executives had experience scaling platforms similar to what we were developing. Marcus Chen, the marketing strategist, has worked with 3 healthcare companies that went from startup to acquisition, she explained. He understands how to position mental health services in ways that reduce stigma and increase accessibility. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with my mother demonstrating knowledge about our industry that she clearly hadn't possessed a week earlier. She asked intelligent questions about our technology platform, our target demographics, and our plans for scaling beyond the Portland market. I have a confession, she said as we were preparing to leave. I've already mentioned your company to 2 of these contacts. I hope that wasn't presumptuous, but the opportunity came up naturally in conversation, and I thought it would be helpful to gauge their interest. I felt a spike of anxiety. What did you tell them? I told them that my daughter was developing a mental health platform with her therapist, that they'd received positive feedback from investors, and that I thought they might be interested in learning more. Both expressed genuine curiosity. Rodriguez maintained her diplomatic composure, but I could sense her concern about my mother taking initiative without consulting us first. It was exactly the kind of boundary-crossing behavior that had characterized our relationship for years. In the future, I said carefully, we'd prefer to discuss any outreach before it happens. We want to control how and when we approach potential partners. My mother nodded, though I caught a flash of defensiveness in her expression. Of course, I apologize if I overstepped. I was excited about the possibilities and moved too quickly. As we walked back to our cars, Dr. Rodriguez asked what I thought about my mother's presentation. It's impressive and concerning in equal measure, I replied. The research is valuable, the contacts could be game-changing, but I'm worried about her tendency to take control. What specific boundaries do you think we need? Clear communication about any actions she takes on our behalf, defined limits on her decision-making authority, and probably regular check-ins to make sure we're all aligned on goals and expectations. Dr. Rodriguez agreed. I think we should also be explicit about the fact that this is your company and your vision. Her role is to support, not to redirect. That evening, I called Elena Vasquez, our business advisor, to discuss how to structure my mother's involvement in a way that maximized the benefits while minimizing the risks. Family involvement in startups can be incredibly valuable or incredibly destructive, Elena said. The key is establishing clear roles and boundaries from the beginning, and having systems in place to address conflicts when they arise. She suggested that we draft a formal advisory agreement that outlined my mother's responsibilities, our expectations, and the limits of her authority. It might seem overly formal for a family relationship, but clarity prevents problems down the road. Elena also recommended that we establish a trial period for my mother's involvement, with built-in evaluation points to assess how the arrangement was working for everyone involved. Give it 3 months, she suggested. If it's working well, you can expand her role. If it's creating problems, you can adjust or discontinue the arrangement. The following week, Dr. Rodriguez and I met with Marcus Chen, the marketing strategist my mother had identified. He turned out to be exactly the kind of professional we needed, experienced with healthcare startups, knowledgeable about mental health stigma, and enthusiastic about our platform's potential. The mental health market is reaching a tipping point, he explained during our meeting at his downtown office. Public awareness about mental health issues is increasing, but access to care remains limited. Platforms like yours could bridge that gap in ways that traditional therapy models can't. Marcus outlined a comprehensive marketing strategy that focused on building trust and reducing stigma, while highlighting the practical benefits of our platform. He understood the delicate balance required to market mental health services, without exploiting vulnerability or making promises we couldn't keep. Your personal story as the founder could be incredibly powerful, he told me. But you'd need to be prepared for the public attention that would come with sharing that narrative. The idea of becoming a public face for mental health advocacy was both exciting and terrifying. It would mean owning my story in a way that would make it impossible to return to the privacy I'd grown up valuing. I think I could do that, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. If it helps other people feel less alone, it would be worth the exposure. Dr. Rodriguez smiled. 6 months ago you could barely tell me about your anxiety. Now you're considering sharing your story publicly, to help others. The observation highlighted how much had changed in my relationship with my own mental health journey. What had once felt like a shameful secret had become a source of strength and purpose. After our meeting with Marcus, Dr. Rodriguez and I returned to her office to discuss the implications of expanding our team and potentially accepting my mother's support more formally. I think we're reaching the point where we need to make some decisions about the structure and direction of this company, she said. The informal collaboration that got us started won't be sufficient if we're going to scale. She was right. What had begun as a creative partnership between therapist and client was evolving into a legitimate business venture that required formal structures, legal agreements, and professional boundaries. Elena suggested that we incorporate as a benefit corporation, I said. It would allow us to prioritize social impact alongside financial returns, which aligns with our mission. Dr. Rodriguez nodded. I like that structure. It would also provide clarity about our respective roles and responsibilities. We spent the next hour discussing equity distribution, decision-making authority, and the framework for bringing on additional team members. It was a conversation that required us to think beyond our therapeutic relationship and establish ourselves as equal business partners. I want to make sure, Dr. Rodriguez said, that our business partnership doesn't interfere with your continued growth and healing. If at any point the dual relationship becomes problematic, we need to be able to address that directly. I appreciate that. But honestly, working with you on this business has been therapeutic in its own way. It's shown me capabilities I didn't know I had. The following week brought news that would accelerate our timeline significantly. Catherine Mills called to inform us that the venture capital firm was prepared to offer initial funding for MindBridge, contingent on our ability to demonstrate user demand and provide additional technical specifications. They're interested in a seed round of $750,000, she explained during our phone call. That would fund initial product development, team building, and market testing for approximately 18 months. The amount was more than I had dared to hope for, but it also came with expectations that felt enormous. We would need to deliver a working platform, acquire initial users, and demonstrate measurable outcomes within a relatively short time frame. What's the timeline for making a decision? Rodriguez asked. They'd like a response within 2 weeks. If you accept, they'd want to see a detailed implementation plan and meet with your full advisory team. After Catherine hung up, Dr. Rodriguez and I sat in silence for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what we'd just heard. This is it, I said finally. This is the moment where we either commit fully or step back. How do you feel about that? Terrified and exhilarated. This could change everything. Are you ready for everything to change? I thought about the young woman who had sat in this same office 8 months earlier, barely able to articulate what was wrong, let alone imagine building a company to address it. That person felt like someone I used to know rather than who I was now. I think I'm ready, but I want to make sure we're making this decision together, not just because the opportunity presented itself. Dr. Rodriguez smiled. I've been thinking about that too. When I started this practice, I wanted to help people heal and grow. This platform could extend that impact beyond anything I could accomplish alone. So, we're really doing this? We're really doing this? That evening, I called my mother to share the news about the funding offer. Her reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Zoe, this is incredible. $750,000 for a startup is substantial validation. It also means we'll need to formalize your involvement if you want to continue helping. The investors will want to meet our advisory team. What would that look like? Elena is drafting an advisory agreement. It would outline your role, our expectations, and the boundaries we discussed. There would also be a trial period to make sure the arrangement works for everyone. My mother was quiet for a moment. I understand the need for structure, and I appreciate that you're willing to include me despite my past mistakes. Mom, I need you to understand that this is my company and my vision. Your role would be to support and advise, not to control or redirect. I understand, and I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built, even if I haven't always shown that effectively. After we hung up, I realized that our conversation had felt different from any family discussion we'd ever had. We were talking to each other as adults with distinct expertise and perspectives, rather than as parent and child locked in familiar patterns of criticism and defense. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Rodriguez and I worked with Elena to develop a comprehensive business plan that addressed the investors' requirements. We outlined our technology development timeline, identified key team members we wanted to hire, and created detailed financial projections for the next 3 years. We also met with several potential technical advisors and began interviewing candidates for our first full-time developer position. The process of building a team forced us to articulate our vision more clearly and consider aspects of company culture that we hadn't previously discussed. What kind of work environment do we want to create? Dr. Rodriguez asked during one of our planning sessions, something that reflects our values about mental health and wellness. If we're building a platform to support people's emotional well-being, our workplace should demonstrate those principles. We talked about flexible schedules, mental health benefits, and creating a culture where seeking support was normalized rather than stigmatized. It was an opportunity to practice what we were preaching and establish MindBridge as the kind of company we wished existed in the world. My mother's first official advisory meeting took place the following Wednesday at Elena's office. She arrived with another comprehensive report, this time focused on competitive analysis and market positioning strategies. I've been researching similar platforms to understand what differentiates MindBridge, she explained, distributing copies of her analysis to Elena, Dr. Rodriguez, and me. Her research was thorough and insightful, identifying gaps in existing services and opportunities for our platform to address unmet needs. She'd also prepared recommendations for strategic partnerships and distribution channels that could accelerate our user acquisition. This is excellent work, Elena said after reviewing the materials. You've identified several competitive advantages that we should emphasize in our investor presentations. As the meeting progressed, I found myself genuinely impressed by my mother's contribution. Her business instincts were sharp, and her recommendations were practical and well-reasoned. More importantly, she was offering suggestions rather than issuing directives, respecting the boundaries we'd established. I have one concern, she said toward the end of the meeting. The timeline for product development seems aggressive given the complexity of what you're building. She was referring to our plan to launch a beta version of the platform within 6 months of receiving funding. It was an ambitious goal that would require hiring quickly and managing development efficiently. What would you recommend? Dr. Rodriguez asked. Consider a phased launch approach. Start with core features and add functionality incrementally based on user feedback. It would reduce initial development time and allow for iterative improvement. Elena nodded in agreement. That's standard practice for most successful platforms. It also reduces risk and allows for course correction based on real user data. The suggestion was practical, and aligned with best practices we'd read about in our research. It was also the kind of strategic thinking that demonstrated my mother's value as an advisor. After the meeting, Dr. Rodriguez and I debriefed over lunch at a nearby restaurant. "Your mother is clearly taking this seriously," she observed. "Her preparation and insights are genuinely valuable, I know. It's strange to see her investing so much energy in supporting something she initially opposed. People can change, Zoe. Sometimes dramatic events create opportunities for growth that wouldn't otherwise exist." I thought about my own transformation over the past 8 months. The panic attacks that had driven me to therapy had ultimately led to discovering my passion and building a business that could help thousands of people. Perhaps my mother's realization about her misconceptions regarding mental health could be equally transformative. "I'm starting to believe that this might actually work," I said. "Not just the business, but the relationship with my mom. What would success look like for both? For the business, it would mean reaching people who need support and making mental health care more accessible. For my relationship with Mom, it would mean having a connection based on mutual respect rather than disappointment and control. Those seem like worthy goals, and they're not mutually exclusive." That evening I received an email from Marcus Chen with a preliminary marketing strategy and timeline for building public awareness of MindBridge. His plan included social media campaigns, partnerships with mental health advocacy organizations, and a content strategy that would position our platform as a trusted resource for emotional wellness. "The key," he wrote, "is building credibility before seeking scale. If users trust your platform, they'll recommend it to others." Word-of-mouth marketing is especially powerful in the mental health space because personal recommendations carry more weight than advertising. His strategy aligned with our values about authentic communication and genuine impact. It also reinforced the importance of getting our initial user experience right, since early adopters would influence our reputation significantly. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that rainy afternoon when I'd first walked into Dr. Rodriguez's office. The anxiety and panic attacks that had felt overwhelming and shameful had become the foundation for a business that could help others facing similar challenges. My relationship with my family was evolving in ways I couldn't have imagined. My mother, who had once forbidden me from seeking therapy, was now actively supporting a mental health company and learning about the value of professional emotional support. Most significantly, I had discovered capabilities and confidence that therapy had helped me recognize, but that building MindBridge was allowing me to develop fully. I was learning to trust my instincts, assert my vision, and navigate complex professional relationships. The young woman who had been afraid to make a therapy appointment was becoming someone who could pitch to investors, lead a development team, and advocate publicly for mental health awareness. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was undeniable. Tomorrow, Dr. Rodriguez and I would submit our response to the venture capital firm, officially accepting their funding offer and committing to the timeline and expectations that came with it. We would also finalize our team structure, incorporate the business, and begin the intensive work of turning our vision into reality. But tonight, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: unqualified pride in who I was becoming and excitement about what I was building. For the first time in my adult life, I was moving towards something I had chosen rather than away from something I was trying to escape. The anxiety that had once defined my daily experience had been transformed into energy for creation and growth. The therapy sessions that had started as crisis management had become strategic planning for a future I was actively building. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about all the people who might use our platform someday, people who were currently sitting in parking lots outside therapists' offices, afraid to walk inside because they'd been told that seeking help was a sign of weakness. If MindBridge could make that first step easier for even one person, everything we were building would be worth it. But beyond the social impact, I was learning that the most profound transformation was happening within myself. I was becoming someone who believed in her own worth, trusted her own judgment, and wasn't afraid to take up space in the world. The business we were building was important, but the person I was becoming was the real revolution. The notification appeared on my phone at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide my life into before and after. It was a simple email from TechCrunch with the subject line, Local mental health startup secures major fund. But seeing MindBridge's name in the headline made my coffee cup slip from my hands and shatter against the kitchen floor of the small apartment I now shared with my business partner turned roommate, Dr. Rodriguez. The article was comprehensive, professional, and absolutely terrifying. Someone had leaked details about our funding round, our platform's features, and even quotes from our investor presentations. Worse, they'd included background information about both Dr. Rodriguez and me, including the fact that I was a former therapy client who had partnered with my therapist to build the company. "Carmen," I called out, my voice higher than usual, "you need to see this immediately." Dr. Rodriguez emerged from her room already dressed for the day, took one look at my face, and sat down at the kitchen table without asking questions. I handed her my phone and watched her expression shift from curiosity to concern to something approaching alarm. "Who could have shared this information?" she asked, scrolling through the article. These details weren't in any public documents. My phone started buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. The first was from a reporter at the Portland Business Journal asking for comment. The second was from a blogger who covered mental health advocacy and wanted to interview me about my unique perspective as both client and entrepreneur. The third call came from my mother, Zoe. Her voice was tight with controlled panic. "I've been getting calls from reporters asking about our family's involvement in your business. What should I tell them?" The question highlighted one of the complications we'd anticipated, but hadn't fully prepared for. Our family's reconciliation and my mother's role as an advisor would now be scrutinized by journalists, looking for interesting angles on our story. "Tell them you're proud of what I've built, and refer all business questions to our PR contact," I said, though we didn't actually have a PR contact yet. "Do we need to be concerned about this attention?" Before I could answer, Dr. Rodriguez's phone rang. It was Catherine Mills calling with information that would change everything. The article came from someone inside the venture capital firm, Catherine explained when Dr. Rodriguez put the call on speaker. "We're investigating how the leak occurred, but the information is accurate, and it's already been picked up by several other publications." She paused, and I could hear the weight of what she was about to say in her silence. "This changes our timeline significantly. We were planning to announce the funding in 2 months after finalizing all legal documents and team hiring. Now that the information is public, we need to be prepared for intense scrutiny and accelerated expectations." Dr. Rodriguez and I looked at each other across the kitchen table, both understanding that our quiet development period had just ended abruptly. "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means you need media training, a communication strategy, and a public-facing version of your platform much sooner than anticipated. It also means you'll need to be prepared for questions about the ethics of your partnership and the effectiveness of your approach." After Catherine hung up, Dr. Rodriguez and I sat in stunned silence, watching my phone continue to buzz with calls from reporters, potential users, and industry professionals who'd read the article. "Are you ready for this?" she asked quietly. "I don't think anyone's ever ready for their private life to become public news. But we knew this was a possibility when we decided to build something meaningful." The next few hours transformed our quiet Tuesday morning into a crisis management operation. Elena Vasquez arrived at our apartment within an hour, bringing with her a communications specialist named David Park, who had experience managing media attention for healthcare startup. "The good news," David said after reviewing the article and its online reception, "is that the coverage is largely positive. The mental health community is responding enthusiastically to your platform concept, and the business press is focusing on the innovative funding and partnership structure." He showed us social media reactions from mental health advocates, therapists, and individuals who'd struggled to access care. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, with many people sharing their own stories about therapy and expressing excitement about our platform's potential. "The challenging news," David continued, "is that several conservative media outlets are questioning the appropriateness of your therapist-client relationship and suggesting that your partnership represents a conflict of interest." He pulled up articles from 3 different publications that raised concerns about boundary violations, questioned Dr. Rodriguez's professional ethics, and suggested that our business model exploited vulnerable individuals seeking mental health care. "These concerns were predictable," Rodriguez said calmly, though I could see tension in her shoulders. The mental health profession has strict guidelines about dual relationships, and some colleagues will view our partnership as problematic regardless of how carefully we've structured it. David nodded. The key is addressing these concerns directly and transparently. We need to explain the safeguards you've implemented, the ethical review process you've followed, and the potential benefits of your unique perspective. Over the next several hours, we developed a comprehensive response strategy. Dr. Rodriguez would reach out to the state psychology board to confirm that our arrangement complied with all professional guidelines. I would prepare a statement about my experience as both a therapy client and business founder. Elena would coordinate with our legal team to ensure all public communications aligned with our regulatory requirements. My mother arrived at the apartment late that afternoon, having fought her way through 3 reporters who'd stationed themselves outside our building. She looked frazzled but determined, carrying a bag of groceries and what appeared to be a media strategy document. "I've been fielding calls all day," she announced, setting the groceries on our counter. "I told everyone that the Hartwell family is incredibly proud of Zoe's entrepreneurial success and that we fully support her vision for improving mental health care accessibility." She handed me a printed sheet with talking points she'd developed. I also reached out to Marcus Chen to discuss accelerated marketing strategies that could capitalize on this unexpected attention. Dr. Rodriguez looked impressed. "That's excellent crisis management. I learned something about myself today," my mother continued. 6 months ago I would have been horrified by public attention focused on our family's mental health experiences. Today, I found myself defending therapy and explaining why your platform could help families like ours communicate better. The transformation in her perspective was remarkable, but I remained focused on the immediate challenges we faced. "What did Marcus recommend?" "He thinks we should lean into the personal story rather than avoiding it. The authenticity of your experience as a therapy client could differentiate MindBridge from other platforms that lack that lived experience perspective." It was sage advice, but it meant embracing a level of public vulnerability that felt overwhelming. Sharing my mental health journey with potential users was one thing, having it dissected by national media was entirely different. That evening, Dr. Rodriguez and I received a call from the Oregon State Board of Psychology requesting a meeting to discuss our business arrangement. The call was professional but serious, indicating that the media attention had prompted official scrutiny of our partnership. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Dr. Rodriguez said after we hung up. "Even if we've done everything correctly, the appearance of impropriety could damage both our business and my professional reputation." "What's the worst-case scenario?" "The board could determine that our partnership violates ethical guidelines and require us to restructure the business or end our collaboration entirely." The possibility of losing Dr. Rodriguez as a partner felt devastating. Beyond her clinical expertise, she had become a trusted collaborator and friend, whose perspective I valued enormously. "We'll deal with whatever happens," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "But I won't let regulatory concerns prevent us from building something that could help thousands of people." The following morning brought both encouraging and concerning development. Our preliminary user signups had increased by 400% overnight, with over 2,000 people requesting beta access to our platform. Mental health advocacy organizations were reaching out about potential partnerships, and several therapists had inquired about joining our provider network. However, we also received a formal complaint filed with the psychology board by someone claiming that our business model exploited vulnerable individuals and violated ethical standards for therapeutic relationships. The complaint was anonymous, but its detailed knowledge of our partnership suggested it came from someone within the mental health profession. David Park scheduled a series of media interviews designed to address the controversy directly. My first interview was with a healthcare journalist from National Public Radio, who specialized in mental health coverage. The central question, she explained during our pre-interview call, is whether someone who was recently a therapy client can maintain appropriate boundaries while partnering with their former therapist on a business venture. "I understand the concern," I replied, "but I think it reflects outdated assumptions about therapy clients being permanently dependent or unable to develop professional relationships with their care providers." "How do you respond to critics who suggest that your platform commercializes the therapeutic relationship?" "I'd say that making mental health care more accessible and affordable helps democratize something that's currently available, mainly to people with significant financial resources. Dr. Rodriguez and I aren't profiting from individual therapy sessions. We're building tools that could help thousands of people access care they couldn't otherwise afford. The interview lasted 30 minutes and covered everything from our platform's technical features to the ethics review process we'd undergone. I felt confident about my responses, but I also understood that public perception wouldn't necessarily align with professional standards or logical arguments. Dr. Rodriguez's interview with a clinical psychology publication was more technical, focusing on the safeguards we'd implemented and the potential benefits of incorporating lived experience into mental health technology development. The traditional model assumes that professional distance is always beneficial, she explained to the interviewer, but research suggests that peer support and shared experience can be incredibly valuable for individuals seeking mental health care. She outlined the ethical consultation process we'd followed, the boundary agreements we'd established, and the ongoing supervision she received from colleagues to ensure our collaboration remained appropriate. This isn't about abandoning professional standards, she emphasized. It's about evolving those standards to recognize that former clients can develop legitimate expertise and contribute meaningfully to advancing mental health care. The psychology board meeting was scheduled for the following week, giving us time to prepare a comprehensive presentation about our partnership structure and ethical safeguards. Elena recommended that we hire a specialist attorney who understood mental health law and professional regulation. Meanwhile, the media attention was generating unexpected opportunities. A producer from a morning television show called to request an interview about innovative approaches to mental health care. A podcaster who covered startup success stories wanted to feature our journey from therapy client to entrepreneur. A documentary filmmaker expressed interest in following our company's development. "This is overwhelming," I told Kai during one of our regular check-in calls. 3 weeks ago I was worried about hiring our first developer. Now I'm being asked to appear on national television. How are you handling the pressure? Better than I expected. Honestly, the therapy work I've done over the past year has given me tools for managing anxiety and staying focused on what matters most. What matters most right now? Building a platform that actually helps people. Everything else is just noise. That perspective helped me navigate the increasingly complex landscape of media requests, regulatory concerns, and business development challenges. Our core mission remained unchanged, even as the external environment became more complicated. Dr. Rodriguez and I spent the weekend preparing for our psychology board presentation, reviewing every aspect of our partnership and ensuring we could articulate the ethical framework that guided our collaboration. "I keep thinking about why we started this," she said as we organized our material. "You needed therapy, therapy helped you discover your passion, and now we're trying to make that same transformation available to other people." Do you regret how complicated it's become? Not for a second. Complicated usually means important. If this were easy, someone else would have already solved the problem we're addressing. Monday morning brought news that would shift the entire dynamic of our situation. The anonymous complaint filed against Dr. Rodriguez had been withdrawn, with a formal statement acknowledging that further research had revealed no ethical violations in our partnership. More significantly, the state psychology board announced that they were forming a task force to develop updated guidelines for therapist-entrepreneur collaborations, using our case as a model for ethical innovation in mental health care. "This is unprecedented," the board chair explained during a phone call to Dr. Rodriguez. "Your partnership has highlighted gaps in our current ethical framework and created an opportunity to develop more nuanced guidelines that support innovation while maintaining professional standards." Instead of facing disciplinary action, Dr. Rodriguez was being asked to help develop new professional standards that could enable other therapist-client partnerships in the future. The news transformed our regulatory challenge into a professional opportunity and positioned us as pioneers rather than rule breakers. Media coverage shifted accordingly, with several publications running follow-up stories about the psychology board's progressive response to innovative mental health partnerships. Our investor meeting that week reflected the dramatically changed landscape we were navigating. Catherine Mills and her partners were enthusiastic about the positive media attention and the validation provided by the psychology board's response. "You've generated more buzz in 2 weeks than most startups achieve in their first year," Catherine observed. The key now is channeling that attention into sustainable business growth. She outlined an accelerated timeline that would have us launching our beta platform within 3 months rather than The condensed schedule was ambitious but achievable given the increased interest from potential users and mental health professionals. We're also recommending that you consider a larger funding round than originally planned, she continued. The market validation you've received suggests that demand for your platform could exceed your initial projections significantly. The possibility of raising additional capital was exciting but also intimidating. Larger funding rounds meant greater investor expectations and more pressure to scale quickly. Elena, who was attending the meeting as our official advisor, raised practical concerns about our readiness for rapid growth. Do you have the team structure and operational capacity to handle accelerated development and user acquisition? She asked. Dr. Rodriguez and I exchanged glances. We'd been so focused on managing the media attention and regulatory challenges that we hadn't fully considered the implications of faster growth. We'd need to hire aggressively and probably bring in experienced executives to handle operations and user acquisition. I'm not sure we're prepared for that level of organizational complexity. Catherine nodded. That's why we're recommending that you consider bringing in a chief executive officer with experience scaling healthcare technology companies. You'd remain the founder and vision leader, but you'd have operational support for managing rapid growth. The suggestion made practical sense, but it also meant sharing control of the company we'd built from nothing. I wasn't sure how I felt about bringing in outside leadership so early in our development. What would that mean for our roles and decision-making authority? Dr. Rodriguez asked. You'd retain significant equity and influence over product development and clinical strategy, but day-to-day operations and business strategy would be managed by someone with relevant experience. As we left the investor meeting, I felt simultaneously excited about our opportunities and overwhelmed by the decisions we needed to make. The media attention had accelerated everything, creating possibilities we hadn't anticipated, but also pressures we weren't sure we could handle. That evening, my mother called with an update on her networking effort. The media coverage had generated interest from several of her business contacts, including 2 potential strategic partners who understood both technology development and mental health service delivery. I've arranged for you to meet with Rebecca Morrison next week, she said. She built and sold a telehealth platform that connected patients with primary care physicians. Her experience could be invaluable for navigating the regulatory and operational challenges you're facing. The introduction sounded promising, but I was learning to be cautious about additional complexity in our already complicated situation. What does she want in return for her advice? Nothing immediate. She's interested in potentially joining your advisory board or providing consulting services. But she wants to understand your vision and assess the market opportunity first. It was exactly the kind of strategic introduction that my mother's business connections could provide. And Rebecca's experience with healthcare technology regulation could address one of our biggest knowledge gaps. Set up the meeting, but make it clear that we're exploring advice and potential collaboration, not necessarily offering any formal role. Dr. Rodriguez and I spent the rest of the week preparing for what felt like a series of interviews that would determine the future direction of our company. We were meeting with potential executives, strategic advisors, and technology partners while also managing continued media requests and finalizing our regulatory presentation. I feel like we're running 3 different companies simultaneously, Rodriguez observed during one of our planning sessions. The media company that's telling our story, the regulatory company that's establishing new professional standards, and the actual technology company that's supposed to help people access mental health care. She was right that our attention was being pulled in multiple directions, but I was beginning to see connections between these different aspects of our work. Maybe they're not separate companies, I suggested. Maybe they're different facets of the same mission. We're not just building a platform, we're changing how people think about mental health care and professional relationships. That's a much bigger vision than what we started with. Sometimes the work chooses you rather than the other way around. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how radically my life had changed since that first therapy appointment. The young woman who had been afraid to acknowledge her anxiety was now being interviewed by national media about mental health advocacy. The daughter who had hidden her therapy appointments was now working with her mother to build a business that celebrated the value of professional mental health support. Most remarkably, the therapeutic relationship that had started as crisis intervention had evolved into a professional partnership that was influencing industry standards and potentially changing how mental health care was delivered. Tomorrow would bring another round of meetings, interviews, and strategic decisions, but tonight I felt something I had never experienced before: complete confidence that I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly the work I was meant to do. The panic attacks that had driven me to therapy had become the foundation for a platform that could help thousands of people access care. The family dysfunction that had made me feel broken had become a source of insight about communication and healing. The shame I had felt about needing help had transformed into pride about building something that normalized seeking support. Every challenge we were facing felt like an opportunity to prove that mental health care could be accessible, effective, and empowering rather than stigmatized. Every interview was a chance to change someone's mind about the value of therapy. Every regulatory conversation was an opportunity to modernize professional standards that had been established decades earlier. I was no longer running away from my mental health struggles or trying to hide my need for support. Instead, I was running toward a future where other people would never have to feel ashamed about seeking help or worry that therapy was a sign of weakness. The media attention that had felt overwhelming was becoming a platform for advocacy. The regulatory challenges that had seemed threatening were becoming opportunities for systemic change. The business pressures that had appeared daunting were becoming motivation for innovation. As I finally fell asleep, I thought about all the people who would eventually use our platform, people who were currently afraid to make that first therapy appointment or couldn't afford traditional mental health care. If our work could make seeking help feel normal and accessible rather than shameful and exclusive, then every difficulty we were navigating would be worthwhile. But beyond the social impact, I was learning that the most profound transformation continued to be personal. I was becoming someone who embraced challenges rather than avoiding them, someone who used her voice rather than hiding it, someone who believed that her experiences could be valuable rather than shameful. The business we were building mattered enormously, but the person I was becoming through building it mattered even more. The notification chimed on my phone at exactly 9:47 a.m. on a crisp October morning, 18 months after that first terrifying therapy appointment. I was standing in the lobby of the newly renovated MindBridge headquarters in Southeast Portland, waiting for the ribbon-cutting ceremony to begin, when the message appeared: "Congratulations, MindBridge has been selected as Time Magazine's Mental Health Innovation of the Year." Rodriguez, who was adjusting the microphone at the small podium we'd set up near our reception area, looked up when she heard my sharp intake of breath. "Good news or challenging news?" she asked, having learned to read my expressions with the precision that comes from both therapeutic training and months of business partnership. "Extraordinary news," I replied, showing her the screen. "We just won Time Magazine's Innovation Award." The recognition felt surreal. 18 months ago, I had been hiding therapy appointments from my family and struggling with panic attacks that made leaving the house feel impossible. Now our platform was being celebrated by one of the world's most prestigious publications for revolutionizing mental health care accessibility. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was modest by tech industry standards, but it represented everything we had built together. Our new office space included therapy rooms for in-person sessions, collaborative workspaces for our development team, and a comfortable lounge area where users could attend virtual support groups or access our digital wellness resource. My mother arrived early, as she had for every major MindBridge milestone over the past year. She carried a bouquet of flowers and wore a pin on her lapel that read, "Mental Health Advocate," a badge she'd started wearing after joining the board of a local suicide prevention organization. "I brought something for you," she said, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a framed photograph from the day of our first investor presentation, showing Dr. Rodriguez and me standing together outside the venture capital firm's office building. "I had it taken from the security camera footage," she explained. "I wanted you to have a reminder of the moment when everything changed." The gesture was thoughtful and surprisingly emotional. The woman in that photograph looked confident and purposeful, but I could also see the nervousness in her posture and the uncertainty in her expression. She had no idea that the presentation she was about to give would launch a company that would eventually serve over 200,000 users across North America. Kai arrived with a group of early MindBridge beta testers, including several people who had become success stories featured in our marketing material. Among them was Sarah, a college student, who had used our platform to connect with a therapist after her campus counseling center had a 6-week waiting list. She was now studying to become a mental health counselor herself. "I wanted to thank you again," she told me as we prepared for the ceremony. MindBridge didn't just help me find therapy, it helped me find my career path. Stories like Sarah's had become the fuel that powered our team through the inevitable challenges of building a healthcare technology company. Every positive user review, every successful therapy match, every person who told us that our platform had made seeking help feel less intimidating reminded us why our work mattered. Elena Vasquez, who had officially joined our team as Chief Operating Officer 6 months earlier, stood near the entrance greeting local business leaders and mental health professionals who had come to celebrate with us. Her presence had been transformative for our company culture, bringing operational expertise that allowed Dr. Rodriguez and me to focus on product development and clinical innovation. 5 minutes until we start, Elena announced, gathering everyone near the podium. I looked around the room at the faces of people who had supported our journey in different ways. Rebecca Morrison, the telehealth entrepreneur my mother had introduced us to, was now our head of strategic partnerships. Marcus Chen had evolved from marketing consultant to chief marketing officer. David Park, our communications specialist, had become an integral part of our leadership team. Most remarkably, standing near the back of the room was Dr. Patricia Wong, the business mentor who had first encouraged me to stop hiding my entrepreneurial ambition. She was now leading a new initiative to help other therapy clients explore business opportunities related to their healing journeys. "Before we officially open these doors," I began, my voice carrying more confidence than I had possessed in any public speaking situation just 2 years earlier, "I want to acknowledge the journey that brought us here." I looked at Dr. Rodriguez, who smiled encouragingly. This company began in a therapy session where I was struggling to understand why I felt so anxious and disconnected from my own potential. The woman who helped me work through those feelings is now my business partner, and together we've built something that we hope can help other people bridge the gap between struggling and thriving. I paused, finding my mother's eyes in the crowd. "I also want to acknowledge that families can grow and change in unexpected ways. Sometimes the people who initially oppose your choices become your strongest supporters once they understand what you're really trying to accomplish." My mother wiped away tears and I saw my father, who had arrived quietly a few minutes earlier, nod in recognition of how much our relationship had evolved. But most importantly, I want to recognize that seeking help isn't a sign of weakness. It's often the first step toward discovering strength you didn't know you had. Every person who uses our platform, every therapist who joins our network, every family member who learns to support rather than stigmatize mental health care, is part of changing how our society thinks about emotional wellness. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward to cut the ribbon, but before she did, she addressed the crowd with the same warmth and professionalism that had made our therapy sessions feel safe and transformative. When Zoe first walked into my office, she was carrying shame about needing support and fear about what seeking help might mean for her future. Today, she's standing here as the founder of a company that has revolutionized how people access mental health care. She smiled at me, then continued. "But this transformation didn't happen because therapy is magic or because entrepreneurs are superhuman. It happened because we were willing to challenge assumptions about professional relationships, about mental health stigma, and about who gets to be an expert in their own healing process." The ribbon fell away, and our guests applauded, but the moment felt more like a beginning than a conclusion. Over the past 18 months, MindBridge had evolved far beyond our original vision of connecting users with therapists. We now offered peer support groups, wellness coaching, crisis intervention resources, and educational content that helped normalize conversations about mental health. Our platform had also become a training ground for innovative therapeutic approaches. Dr. Rodriguez was leading research on the effectiveness of technology-assisted therapy, and our data was contributing to academic studies about accessibility and outcome measurement in mental health care. As the crowd mingled and toured our new offices, I found myself in conversation with Dr. James Chen, a psychiatrist who served on the American Psychological Association's Technology Committee. Your model is being studied by professional organizations across the country, he told me. The ethical framework you and Dr. Rodriguez developed has become a template for other therapist-client collaborations. The recognition was gratifying, but it also highlighted how much responsibility came with being pioneers in this space. Every decision we made about boundaries, transparency, and professional conduct was being scrutinized and potentially replicated by others. What surprised you most about building this company? He asked. How much the work changed me personally. I replied without hesitation. I thought entrepreneurship would be about building something external, but it turns out that creating a company forces you to develop capabilities and confidence you didn't know you needed. Later that afternoon, after most of our guests had left, the core MindBridge team gathered in our conference room for a strategic planning session. We'd just received preliminary approval for expanding into 3 additional states, and we needed to discuss the operational implications of serving a much larger user base. Our biggest challenge isn't technology or funding, Elena observed as she reviewed our growth projection. It's maintaining the quality and personal connection that differentiates us from larger platforms, while scaling to serve hundreds of thousands of users. Dr. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. We've built something that feels personal and trustworthy, because it started with an authentic therapeutic relationship. The question is whether we can preserve that authenticity as we grow. It was a fundamental question that many successful startups faced, but it felt particularly crucial for a mental health platform. Our users trusted us with their most vulnerable experiences, and that trust couldn't be sacrificed for efficiency or profit. What if we approach scaling the same way we approached the original ethical questions? I suggested. Instead of assuming we have to choose between growth and authenticity, what if we innovate new models that preserve both? Marcus, who had been taking notes throughout our discussion, looked up with interest. What would that look like practically? Regional hubs with local clinical coordinators, Dr. Rodriguez replied immediately. We could maintain the technology platform centrally, while ensuring that users in each market have access to therapists who understand their specific community and cultural context. We could also develop a mentor network, I added, thinking about my own journey from client to entrepreneur. Pair users who've made significant progress with people who are just starting their mental health journey. Elena started sketching organizational charts on the whiteboard. This is more complex than traditional scaling models, but it aligns with our values and could actually strengthen user engagement. As we worked through the operational details, I felt the familiar excitement that had driven our company from the beginning. We weren't just solving business problems, we were reimagining how mental health support could be delivered at scale without losing the human connection that made it effective. The meeting ran late into the evening, but nobody seemed eager to leave. We were in one of those creative flow states where ideas built on each other and seemingly impossible challenges began to feel manageable. I have an announcement, Dr. Rodriguez said as we were finally preparing to wrap up. I've been invited to speak at the International Conference on Mental Health Innovation next month. They want me to present our model as a case study in ethical collaboration between therapist and client. The invitation represented significant professional recognition, but it also meant that our approach was influencing the broader mental health field in ways we had never anticipated. What will you focus on in your presentation? Elena asked. The importance of lived experience in designing mental health interventions. For too long, our field has created services based on clinical theory rather than user perspective. Zoe's insights as both a former client and current entrepreneur have been invaluable for building something that actually meets people's needs. As we finally left the office that night, I walked to my car thinking about the trajectory of my relationship with Dr. Rodriguez. We had evolved from therapist and client to business partners to colleagues, who were influencing professional standards in our industry. But underneath all those changes, the foundation of trust and mutual respect that had developed during our therapeutic work remained constant. The following week brought news that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. The Oregon State Psychology Board announced that they were implementing new guidelines for therapist-client collaborations, using our partnership as the model for ethical innovation in mental health care. "This is unprecedented," the board chair explained during a press conference. "Dr. Rodriguez and Ms. Hartwell have demonstrated that former therapeutic relationships can evolve into professional partnerships when appropriate boundaries are maintained and proper oversight is provided." The announcement generated national media attention and positioned MindBridge as a catalyst for systemic change in mental health professional standards. But for me, the most meaningful recognition came in a letter from my grandmother's estate attorney. "I wanted you to know that your grandmother would have been incredibly proud of what you've accomplished," he wrote. "She struggled with depression during an era when seeking help carried enormous stigma. She would have loved knowing that her granddaughter helped make mental health care more accessible." Reading those words, I thought about all the people who had struggled in silence because they lived in times or places where mental health support wasn't available or socially acceptable. Our platform couldn't help everyone retroactively, but it could ensure that fewer people in the future would have to face emotional challenges without support. 6 months later, I stood on the stage at the TED conference in Vancouver, looking out at an audience of innovators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who had gathered to hear about breakthrough ideas that could change the world. 2 years ago, I was sitting in a therapist's office having a panic attack because I was too afraid to tell my family that I needed help. Today, I'm standing here as the founder of a company that has helped over 300,000 people access mental health care. I paused, letting the magnitude of that transformation settle with the audience. But this talk isn't really about building a successful business, it's about what becomes possible when we stop treating vulnerability as weakness and start recognizing it as a source of insight and innovation. I spoke about the shame that had initially prevented me from seeking therapy, about my mother's journey from opposing mental health care to becoming one of its strongest advocates, and about how my therapeutic relationship with Dr. Rodriguez had evolved into a professional partnership that was changing industry standards. "The most revolutionary thing about our company isn't the technology we've developed," I continued. "It's the recognition that people who have experienced mental health challenges aren't just consumers of services. They can be leaders, innovators, and experts in designing solutions that actually work." After my talk during the networking reception, I was approached by entrepreneurs from around the world who were working on mental health innovation. Many of them shared their own stories about therapy, family resistance to seeking help, and the challenges of building companies in stigmatized industries. "Your story gives me courage to share my own," a young man from Kenya told me. "I've been building a mental health platform for my community, but I was afraid to mention that it was inspired by my own depression." "Your experience is your expertise," I replied. "Don't let anyone convince you that having struggled with something disqualifies you from helping others navigate similar challenges." As I flew home to Portland that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my relationship with vulnerability had changed. What had once felt like my greatest weakness had become my greatest strength. The anxiety that had driven me to therapy had inspired a business that was helping hundreds of thousands of people access care. The family dysfunction that had made me feel broken had taught me about communication, boundaries, and the power of professional support. The shame I had carried about needing help had transformed into pride about building something that normalized seeking support. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that healing isn't a destination. It's an ongoing process of growth, discovery, and contribution. My work with Dr. Rodriguez in therapy had prepared me for entrepreneurship, but building MindBridge had also deepened my understanding of myself and my capacity for resilience. 2 years after that first terrifying therapy appointment, I no longer saw seeking help as a sign of weakness. I saw it as evidence of wisdom, courage, and self-awareness. I no longer felt ashamed about my mental health journey. I felt grateful for experiences that had taught me empathy and given me purpose. Most remarkably, I no longer feared that my vulnerability made me unqualified to lead. Instead, I understood that authenticity and lived experience were exactly what qualified me to build something meaningful in the world. The panic attacks that had once controlled my life had become the foundation for a platform that was democratizing mental health care. The mother who had once told me that therapy was for weak people was now volunteering for mental health advocacy organizations. The therapeutic relationship that had started as crisis intervention had evolved into a business partnership that was influencing professional standards across our industry. As I walked into my apartment that night, I found a congratulations card that Dr. Rodriguez had left on my kitchen counter. Inside, she had written, "You asked me once what would happen if you became strong enough to help other people instead of just needing help yourself. I think we found out." Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that the most profound transformation hadn't been building a successful company or changing my family's perspective on mental health. It had been discovering that my struggles weren't obstacles to overcome, but experiences to integrate and share. The young woman who had been afraid to walk into a therapist's office had become someone who could stand on international stages advocating for mental health accessibility. The daughter who had hidden her therapy appointments was now working with her mother to support other families navigating mental health challenges. The client who had felt ashamed about needing professional support was now partnering with her former therapist to revolutionize how that support was delivered. Every person who used our platform, every family that learned to communicate more effectively, every individual who discovered that seeking help was a sign of strength rather than weakness, was proof that vulnerability could be transformative not just personally, but collectively. The business we had built mattered enormously, but the relationships we had healed and the conversations we had started mattered even more. We had created more than a platform, we had contributed to a cultural shift that was making emotional wellness as important as physical health. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about all the people who were still sitting in parking lots outside therapists' offices, afraid to walk inside because someone had told them that seeking help was a sign of weakness. Tomorrow our team would continue working to make that first step easier, to create resources that normalized mental health care, and to build technology that connected people with support when they needed it most. But tonight I felt something I had never experienced before my therapeutic journey began: complete peace with who I had become, and excitement about who I was still becoming. The work wasn't finished, but the foundation was solid, and the future held infinite possibilities for growth, impact, and continued healing. The mother who had once said therapy was for weak people now introduced herself at social events as the mother of a mental health entrepreneur. The therapist who had helped me work through panic attacks was now my business partner and collaborator in changing industry standards. The family that had once been broken by poor communication and unrealistic expectations was now united by shared purpose and mutual respect. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be ashamed of needing help. Sometimes the bravest choice is to transform your struggles into strength that can benefit others. And sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply allowing yourself to become who you were always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.